Today I want to talk about my favorite RPG fantasy setting, Shadow World. It's probably not a fantasy setting many people have heard of, and by talking about it on this channel, I'm probably not going to increase the amount of people very much who know about this. Um, it was a RPG create. It's an RPG setting created for the Rolemaster rules in the 1980s, built out of first the Loremaster modules uh, from that were published in the 1980s, specifically for the Rolemaster rule set. And in I believe 1989 or 1990, the first edition box set of the setting came out and had a wonderful cover, one that caught my attention, but I did not buy it right away. By the time I bought this had come out, the second edition for Rolemaster by the great Terry Kevin Amthor, the late great Terry Kevin Amthor, who died a few years back. It is. I plan on doing a couple of videos about this. This one's going to be short, just introducing you to the setting, which has had. This is its fourth edition here. This is the third edition here, and of course, it has many supplements. Most of its best supplements actually came out after Iron Crown Enterprises folded. Iron Crown Enterprises being the publisher who produced the original Rolemaster rules, first and second edition, and also who obviously published Shadow World, but also published MERP, Middle Earth Role Playing, and which is exactly what it sounds like. It is the Rolemaster rules re-edited and simplified for specifically Middle Earth, and it had a number of wonderful source books for it. It gets criticized sometimes for being too Dungeons & Dragons like, but Rolemaster was originally created as a supplement for Dungeons & Dragons. For people, there was an obsession in the 80s for what was called realism, which for many people meant increasing complexity, making combat resemble real life combat more, or at least how they thought real life combat should be. They created modules though for Rolemaster alongside of MERP. In fact, actually, the early Middle Earth supplements were statted for Rolemaster, and the later ones were statted for both Rolemaster and for MERP. MERP was, I think, by far the more popular of the two rule setting. It was a much simpler and easier to digest. Rolemaster, though, is actually a criminally underrated rule set. The only problem with it is that it had extremely fiddly character level advancement and character level creation. But Shadow World was the specific setting created for it, and this cover enticed me to buy it, and I have never regretted that particular time where I decided that I was going to judge a book by its cover. This was the correct thing to do on this. I love, absolutely adore this cover, and this drew me in, and it drew me into a world of excellent adventure and very, very complicated game world, a very intriguing game world. I plan to do a series of videos like this on each aspect that I admire about the setting. I'm going to start with its history next. I'm going to do the Loremaster modules, the ones that were the ones that led directly into the creation of the Shadow World. Then I'm going to talk about the Shadow World atlases, and then I'm going to probably ignore a lot of the early supplements and talk about the good stuff first. Uh, Talk about all the good stuff that was published by Terry, or written by Terry and published by Iron Crown Enterprises, and the ones that were written by Terry and published by his own studio called Eidolon Studios, and then talk about what happened when he started publishing again with the new Iron Crown Enterprises, the new ICE Iron Crown Enterprises, and talk about all the excellent supplements he did and the excellent supplements that we're never going to get because of his untimely death. It's a tribute to what is my favorite fantasy setting for role-playing games. And one of my favorite fantasy settings that would be a magnificent fantasy setting, even if it wasn't set up for role-playing. I would want to use this setting because of its strengths. And it's one of its many strengths is that it is a fantasy setting built in the mold to look like an 80s style fantasy setting, 80s 90s style fantasy setting, but with its roots deeply embedded in pre Del Rey fantasy. If you know what the Del Rey fantasy formula was, it resembles it in some ways, but the pre-Del Rey fantasy roots, the influence of not just fantasy on the setting, but also of course sci-fi. It was very influenced by Frank Herbert's Dune, very influenced by Michael Moorcock's Elric and Stormbringer, very influenced by H.P. Lovecraft, and very much influenced also by the 70s and 60s fantasy and sci-fi, which were not as rigidly divided. And the setting has 4 things in it that I very much like. First, it has magic. It has second, it has technology, including fairly advanced technology, including technology more advanced than is current technology. It has sci-fi technology. It also has a third thing which I'll call Magitech, because I don't have a better word for it, which is magic that basically is indistinguishable from technology, and it has techno-magic, which is technology which is indistinguishable from magic. They're distinguishable only in the sense that techno-magic will not be detected as magic, and Magitech will be, but they both have similar functions as standard technology. And the backstory of the setting is essentially science fiction with a science fiction explanation for fantasy existing in the setting. And it is an excellent setting, partially for that reason, but it has a number of strengths that I want to explain. It is a setting rich in its fictional in-universe setting, in-universe history, and it is also rich with interesting NPCs. It has multiple cultures developed somewhere along the lines of Harn and Glorantha and Empire of the Petal Throne, and so it has this sort of anthropologist level view of of cultures, races, peoples, but does not have it lacks the incomprehensibility of an early on that a Empire of the Petal Throne or a Glorantha has. In other words, there's much more familiar tropes at the surface, but you dig deeper and you get the depth, almost to the depths to the levels of that. So in that way, it's more like Harn in that it is describing familiar fantasy tropes, but the context is very evolved. But unlike Harn, it is definitely a high technology, high magic, high fantasy setting. Although the high technology is very much hidden, it is below the surface. And early on in the campaign, off when I run it, early in the campaign, the technological level is kept at bay so that my players are playing in a fantasy setting. But that is my introduction to it, and my next video should be the history of the setting, how it grew out of the Loremaster series of modules published by Iron Crown Enterprises in the 1980s. Until then, goodbye.